Welcome to another issue of the Worship Lounge. I'm your host, Reverend Jon Owens, and today's special guest, you may already all know him. It's my boss and your rector, the Reverend Scott Denman, and we are here to celebrate his 25 years of priesthood. Now, one thing we don't do always well in the Episcopal Church is hear testimonies, but it's something worth listening to. We all have stories. And today we're going to hear Scott's story. So Scott, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. And I really appreciate it. I mean, as I told you the other day, John, you were the one who reminded me that my anniversary was coming up. I've never really celebrated it before. And I guess, especially now that it's the 25th, I appreciate you pointing that out. It is kind of a landmark. Happy to be here.
Absolutely, 25 years. That's a quarter of a century. So with that, can you just paint us a picture? What was life like before the priesthood and what led up to a call to ministry?
Well, most people know at St. John's, I joke around a little bit about my calling because, seminarians always ask me, when did you receive your call to ministry? And my usual response is, I'm expecting it any day now. It seems to me like it's been a process of daily call. I was not setting out to do this. I had always dreamed of kind of a scientific career of some kind. I was always doing laboratory work in my basement and making all kinds of things. But I think actually the first inclination I had was with someone who was really irritating to me. They were trying to convert me. This is back when I was in high school. And I always thought that I was so arrogant to try to assume that, someone else knew something I needed. But interestingly enough, through that, I started to feel like God was trying to reach me on some level. And so that was probably the initial opening. It's not that I didn't go to church. My parents were very infrequent in going to church, and then I didn't really have any profound connection with the church growing up. Kids in Sunday school are always amazed to find that I didn't go to Sunday school. But as things evolved, I felt a true transition, kind of a conversion experience in high school eventually, and got very involved in a Baptist church. So a very strong kind of a love-hate relationship with the fundamentalist church that brought me initially into their fold. And then I went off to college. I became the head of the largest, actually it was the largest group on campus. I was the president of what was called a campus ambassador group, and it was an attempt to bring conversation into the student body about actually everything from racism to hunger to social action to Bible interpretation. All of them were incredibly popular on the campus. We would pack places out for debates and a conversation. That was fun. And then, as the story goes, I finished all my pre-med, all geared up to go off to medical school, and then, as I say, chose the more lucrative career of philosophy. I just became enamored with a philosophy class, and then I ended up becoming, really all the philosophy professors called me the philosophy student because I took so many classes. I was fascinated at what people thought, why they thought that, how they formed conclusions about that. And I'm still a philosopher at heart. And then went off to Harvard to study theology, and then from there, really felt a move from my head into the community, and I thought I should check out being involved in churches. And I went to a an evangelical seminary at first, and then eventually that evolved into an Episcopal seminary. So I ended up with basically three master's degrees.
So that's interesting that you talk about. So, I mean, philosophy can be very broad, and theology is kind of a more narrow focus, focusing on views of God. So how did you go from more of a secular approach of philosophy into, say, theology?
Well, I don't think theology ever played an important role in my life. I remained very philosophical. It was more actually a liturgical power that I felt coming from the Episcopal Church in particular. I became very interested in, I worked with the leading process philosopher, Charles Hartshorne, who was considered one of the two most important living philosophers of our day. Had the privilege of working directly with him, and that theology fascinated me because it was evolving. I think what I had a problem with is a stuck view that you never leave this particular understanding of God. Professors that had yellowed notes because they'd used them for 35 years, and I did not get along well. Just because God may not change in many ways doesn't mean you shouldn't be changing. I thought process philosophy allowed for an openness and an evolution, and didn't have to go back to really what was Aristotle's view, and Thomas Aquinas adopted it later, this idea of an unmoved mover, that God could not change, because that would imply some learning or some imperfection in God. And heaven forbid that God would change. So I think you can get, I like Immanuel Kant, who wrote the Critique of Pure Reason. And he helped me understand that theology leans way too much into reliance on reason. It has its limits. So you can only go down that path so far, and pretty soon you end up with concepts that are going to suffocate you, and you need to rely on other kinds of philosophical concepts and ideas.
So in seminary, you made this jump from evangelical to Episcopal. What happened? What drew you to the Episcopal Church?
Oh, immediately I was enamored with it. I was going through actually a kind of dark night of the soul at one point, because I had been somebody who was very, I don't know what the word was, but I think I was very heady. And when I began to do inner work, and some real questions started to come out, I felt like the churches that I'd been involved with were so steady, like, if you don't have joy, if you don't have a smile on your face, faith is nowhere to be found. When in fact, sometimes faith calls us to let go, to trust in a deeper way, to experience some doubt, some questioning. And so when I entered the Episcopal Church, I was experimenting. Someone invited me. I was astounded that there were seasons of the church, that you could enter a Lent and just say, tough times, questioning, doubt, brokenness, not having the answers. It's okay in the Episcopal Church. And I felt like, and that was also my resistance to systematic theology, because I love James Cone's view. He says systematic theology is like the enslavement of ideas, chaining down God, uh, and certainly applicable today with the issues that we're talking about.
So, what then drew you to decide to pursue a life of ordination, and what was that like?
Um, well, I realized that the community, I was looking for more personal realities, not intellectual realities. I did consider getting a PhD and going down the ivory tower approach, and I chose not to do that because I felt like real change happens in community. So then I thought, well, how do I bridge that gap? Um, and I thought maybe I should consider ordination. And I wasn't in a hurry to do it. Um, in fact, it was not an easy ordeal. I was at the time. Uh, there were 5 applicants in the Diocese of Massachusetts. I'm sorry, there were 5 positions, and there were 200 and some applicants. I mean, it was extremely popular time for people to want to be ordained in the church. And so, and I was the only white guy. They really want to emphasize women and people of color, which I agreed that was important. And but somehow I stumbled into the fold there, and it was an amazing time. I had been, I started a contracting business, and so for 17 years, well, sometimes while I was overlapping with school and study, I was also, making money to support the family by building originally house renovations, and then it went into commercial work, where I had commercial contracts, and I had a union and a non-union company, and all those things were really important to hang. I remember one day I was invited to the Harvard Faculty Club for a discussion in the afternoon. In the morning, I was sitting on the joint compound bucket talking with plumbers, uh, uh, during a break. And I love that. I love that, all these ideas have to be tested in real life. And if they don't work at the Roach Coach at break time, on a building site, who cares? If they seem very fanciful and beautiful in a classroom.
Yeah, wow. So, reflecting on your 25 years, would you say has been some of the milestones or major shifts in your ministry?
Well, I love talking about my entrance into my first job, if you will. Um, I was asked to become what's called the Cox Fellow at the St. Paul's Cathedral in Boston. And I resisted that because I thought I was going to end up, running for coffee for for the canons of the cathedral or something like that. I would rather have kept my business going and just help a struggling church and have more of a significant role. But as it turned out, when I finally was convinced to take the position, all 4 canons at the cathedral were leaving for one reason or another, which left this big vacuum. And so when I went in for work, no one was there to greet me. I'm walking around. And one of the administrators said, "Oh, welcome, Scott. Yeah, they said, go ahead and take the dean's office. But don't mess anything up. We don't know if she's coming back." She actually had cancer, and she had been out for that reason. And unfortunately, she never returned and eventually passed away. And so I was, as a deacon, thrown into the dean's office. and and then kind of put kind of in charge of the cathedral, but under the supervision of the bishops. And so I met directly with Tom Shaw and Barbara Harris, who I just adored. Worked right next to her, her office, and so we would talk all the time. She'd come into my office, and she was the first woman ordained in the Episcopal Church. And she would get these horrendous letters, and she'd bring them over to my office. Scott, take a look at this. I can't. I mean, it was awful. I mean, the things that people were so resistant of change in the church. The terrible things that were written to her, the threats. I mean, she had to wear a bulletproof vest at her installation as a bishop, and there were FBI agents dressed as clergy around with. I mean, it's so unfortunate that people again get stuck in their theology. But I don't want to blame it all on theology. There's people are at fault too. But anyway, and then the bishop who hired me, who was a bit of an anomaly, I thought, that was part of the reason I was hesitant to go there, committed suicide. He took a shotgun, and that was it. And then the scandals came out about what was happening. And and I was to preach at the first Sunday after that happened. And so I went to Barbara Harris and Tom Shaw, and I said, I can't be. I mean, I'm a deacon. I'm not going to preach at the cathedral. And they said, yes, you are. We're not changing our schedule. So I preached at the cathedral. It was right during the Kobe earthquakes and these big earthquakes in Kobe. And so I used that as the metaphor of just the foundations being cracked, and we're attending to others when we don't realize how we have been impacted ourselves. But anyway, this is all to say that my ministry started out in these big, being thrown into these big calamities. And when Tom Shaw became the bishop, he downsized the staff by 75%. He said, Scott, I want you in charge of all the pastoral care of all the outgoing staff members. Okay. Anyway, I did preach at the cathedral, and then the press were always after me because they saw me as the spokesperson, and I kept saying no. We have a communications department. And, People magazine, I remember, was the worst. They were always after me when I showed up at work. They had people with cameras, and they just wanted to get at the scandal of it all. But those were amazing times. In that brokenness, new things started happening in that diocese, and amazing people working both with Tom Shaw and Barbara Harris and the other staff members who've gone on to do other things. So it was a creative time, but it was a hard time. And so I kind of associate the best of times with the worst of times, kind of the tale of two cities beginning. And that's, I think those things are always combined.
That's a pretty incredible story. A lot of intense moments in it, you know, and you certainly have to have a lot of gifts to be able to handle situations like that. So, what would you say your gifts for ministry are?
Well, I think one of the things that helped me through that very chaotic time was the fact that I didn't. I don't mean to say my ignorance, but my lack of familiarity in a sense with the Episcopal way of doing things. I found myself doing things that I realized, oh, maybe I shouldn't be doing that. Like I revised really the idea of confirm not conform. Those ideas I was working with already in Boston. I put together this confirmation program and Sunday school program for the kids, and then but it was always second thought, oh, maybe I should ask the bishop about that because it's the cathedral. And so I didn't. A lot of people respond. I guess I had a little I felt at ease with bishops, for one thing. It's just people, even though they're incredible people that I deeply respected. I didn't tiptoe around. I just did what I felt was coming from me, and that's sort of the way I've always been, which has made me a bit of a rule breaker, or kind of trusting my own instincts rather than waiting for permission, kind of asking for forgiveness rather than waiting for permission kind of approach. There's that, and also just a sense of humor. You know, when people get really uptight about stuff, I like to say that you can't do serious work if you take yourself too seriously. So I've been at times, I think I have a gift of being a bit of a clown. And you know about my flaming Bible and my children's sermons on stilts and whatever. It's kind of a lighten up approach. It doesn't mean that I'm not taking things seriously, but I think humor is so needed in our world, and you can use it in a way that actually is quite serious. It opens up doors. It lightens people up. It deepens conversations. It puts people at ease. And that's hugely important, I think, in building community.
Certainly, being able to do those things changes hearts and minds. And as you reflect on that, what have been some of your highs and lows in ministry?
Well, I think one I just mentioned, it was sort of both a high and a low, with the cathedral incident, very tumultuous. And yet, I guess I've come to see that the lows and the highs are often very tightly related to each other. And that's because it reminds you that there's a God, that God gets the glory, that God is at work. And, when I think I'm at work and, oh, this is going just the way I want it to, I think there's some joy and some hope and some spirit that you miss in all of that understanding. I do celebrate a transition that I experienced in the Bay Area, where I got exposed to community organizing, and I started working with other congregations, and that just I found that so inspiring. People of different faiths. One of the high points of that was right after 9/11 happened. I was listening to NPR driving on my way to the church, and I heard an imam from a mosque being interviewed, and he said, we really need to reach out to the community. We need to develop relationships with other people of faith so that we can communicate that this is not who we are. We are not like those fundamentalists. So I remember I didn't have an appointment at the office right away, so I turned the car around and drove right down to the mosque, knocked on the door, said, I just heard your interview. How about it? Let's form a relationship. And we did. Hamid Mavani, who is now a scholar, I've lost track of him. He went to Iran for a while, but he was the imam at the Islamic Cultural Center. And we actually did joint services. They taught us how they pray. We would go down to the mosque, and we had a joint we had a Eucharistic service at St. John's with 70 Muslims in it. And I remember them feeling real tense because they both have a principle of not refusing hospitality, but also they're not allowed to consume alcohol. So we had to make it very clear, you're welcome to have the bread, you don't have to. And so we were sharing the bread with Muslims who would not, participate with the wine. And then we had this big banquet with foods together afterwards, and that was such a beautiful moment in my experience. But all of them come out of that community involvement. So, and of course, the other one is when we had the conversations about race with St. Augustine's, and how that led to deepened relationships around issues of racism, and then led to action in the city, and the procession from City Hall with our council member and also the chief of police, then chief of police. And so she was new, and we developed a relationship with her right away. And unfortunately, she's not here now. This would have been a wonderful platform, that experience, to do something around our current police issues with the chief of police, who had already gotten to know us as a faith community. So, but they have a different police chief now, an interim police chief. So we weren't able to have that same kind of opportunity.
Definitely sounds like you've had a lot of wide range of amazing experiences, learning experiences that challenge you and grow. So when you think and reflect on all that, what's next for you?
Let me check my watch here. I've always had a struggle with that question. I envy people that see the light on the hill. And I realized at one point I'm a compass person. I follow the compass, and I don't know where it's going to lead next. People have always been like wondering, oh no, Scott's going on sabbatical. He's going to come back and then he's going to leave. That seems to have been the pattern for a lot of clergy. They go off on sabbatical and they realize, oh, wait, there's other things I can do. But I think St. John's has been such a unique community, always growing, that there's always been a reason to stay. I mean, I remember coming back from my first sabbatical and saying, wow, we're looking into this building opportunity at the church. I was like, a long time ago. That's been a long journey. But also we were just co-founding Genesis, the community organizing effort in the Bay Area, and that was very kind of feeble at a time. I didn't know whether it would keep going. And we were also developing Confirm Not Conform, and that was a sprout, and it wasn't yet a tree, and so I didn't want those things to drop. And so there's always been a reason to come back, because I think St. John's accepts people who are growing, and so I've been able to grow with it. I think if I felt like the church didn't let me go out and into the community and do stuff, obviously, I probably would have been long gone. So I think the fit has been really, really wonderful with St. John's. I feel very blessed to be the rector here. So I don't know what's next. I think of what's next, like I'm excited right now about our racism series. I don't know what that's going to look like and how it will evolve. I'm excited about more opportunity to connect in the community. These ideas of becoming a community center and what that might take, and what that might look like, what the future of the church might look like. I mean, these are all opportunities we're experiencing. So it's hard for me not to wake up every day with a kind of excitement. And so that's what's immediately next for me.
And it's also, I think, always important, because even though we sometimes get this idea of what's next, the Holy Spirit sometimes comes in and says, I got other plans for you.
There is that. Yes, there is that. Well, I mean, I've heard people refer to the COVID virus as a teacher, and it's been tragic, but it's also broken us out of a walled space into this kind of format, and I think we're only scratching the surface. It feels like there's so many opportunities to learn and grow uh, as a church movement, and we know the church has to change its sense of who it is and what it's about in order to grow, because the decline in the mainline congregations is pretty dramatic. And so the fact that St. John's is really interested in doing that is putting their faith and their prayer and their service and their money behind growing St. John's, and becoming as relevant as we can to people, and building community, building opportunities to give people meaning and come out of isolation, and it's just a wonderful vision to have.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I want to thank you so much for taking time to share. I'm sure there's many in the congregation that this will be something new for them, to actually things that they didn't know about you. Congratulations on your 25 years, and just know that we all love you.
Well, I love you too, and I love St. John's, and it's just been pretty amazing that it's gone so well for so long, and I have high hopes for the future of St. John's in its ministries. I really do. So, and I'm just delighted that you're here, Jon, and you are the result of vision. Not you per se the result, but you're here because of a real commitment to wanting to grow and to evolve and to try some new things. So I'm very grateful for you.
Thank you very much. Well, again, thank you, and have a wonderful day.
Yeah. See you on Sunday.
See you on Sunday.
At least.